were only 6 people that had registered to come on as well, so I think we're almost there. I'm Mike, this is Pippa, and we both of us work for Pippa. Just introduce yourself a little bit more thoroughly.
Yes, I work for him for good, and I'm a regional lead for our Yorkshire and North East section, and I learned the other day, which also includes North Lincolnshire, which didn't realise, but there we go, that includes that too. So I'm, for all your local connections is me.
Brilliant, fantastic. And I'm from the other side of the hill. I'm the Pippa of the northwest of England, and I'm pleased to say that only goes down as far as Crewe. So, brilliant, excellent. Thought it'd be good. Well, first of all, to say that we've got a lot to pack in, so forgive us if it seems a little bit scripted, but we've had to script it a bit to make sure we get it all in good time. But I thought it'd be good, very quickly, to introduce ourselves to each other. So if you could just literally, we start at your end and just say, this is who I am, and maybe say why you've come to this seminar.
So I'm Simon, I'm from St Mark's Church, I'm a youth worker, not full time, my spare time. I chose this one really because we've got one large family, we've got 7 children, and they're all either in care, or some are with the parents, some are being brought into the care. I was hoping that it was going to be something along those sort of lines that would maybe help.
I'm Simon. Me and my wife are foster carers, and we're the principal of good for Sheffield, Bolton and Barnsley. And this was where I wanted to come to, and I might say a little bit more later.
I'm Diane. I work 17-week project worker at a church called Christ and Pippa, just outside of Barnsley, and St Helens in Thursday. I've been up here 18 months. In that role, my previous role as children and family worker, we had a number of families within our church that had adopted or long-term fostering. So it's an environment I'm used to having families around, but here I know there are families in our community who are, and it's just good to reconnecting with things.
I'm Richard. I come from All Saints Church at Ecclesall in Sheffield, and I just thought that churches should be welcoming, and I found out a bit more about being a welcoming church.
Fantastic, thank you.
I'm Karen, I'm the children and youth worker from St Paul's Bridge. I have an adopted grandson. I have a fostered, soon to be adopted granddaughter. Littlies, who are part of the congregation, I'm finding a way to introduce them, but we've 2 weeks ago had another family arrive with 2 adopted children. So I need to know. I need to know what to do myself, but also for these are the children.
That's great. That's really good. I'm pleased to say that most of what you said is perfect with what we're going to try and cover over the next 45 minutes or so. Just to say as well that I am an adoptive father as well. I have 2 wonderful adopted children who are now 27 and 30. And the 27-year-old finally moved out of the house 3 weeks ago.
Listen, my 27-year-old, well he's now 31. He moved out at 22. He moved back in with his wife and his daughter last year. So don't get
Stephen's been told very, very clearly, the reason you're moving out, Steve, is so we can buy a smaller house where there will be no room for you. Brilliant, excellent. We're going to start by taking a brief look at the context and some statistics, but before we do that, I've got a very short film that I'm going to show you. And Simon, you have to promise me that you won't tell the powers that be that I showed this, because it's a bit out of date, alright? So,
But it's a good film.
it's a good film.
unconditional. Nothing you can do will ever stop me loving you. In my eyes, you will always be my longed-for, fought-for child. Your ever-loving Father, God.
Receives from our Father God as we are welcomed into his family can be passed on to others. Today there are thousands of children in the UK care system who need to experience acceptance, welcome and unconditional love. They need fathers and father figures, mothers and mother figures. Could you accept as you have been accepted? Could you welcome as you have been welcomed? Could you love as you have been loved? Together we can find a home for every child who needs one.
So that he doesn't get in trouble with the Department for Education, I have to point out that Chris is no longer a director of Home for Good. Because they will have a conflict of interest if I don't say that, but there we go. I don't know whether you're into statistics, some people are, some people aren't. This just sets the context for you. 103,000 children in care in the UK at this moment in time. About 35,000 children is estimated will come into care this year alone. That's about 95 children every day, or roughly one child every 15 minutes will be taken into care. At least 60% of those children will have suffered abuse and neglect, and all of them will experience some sort of trauma or loss. But have you ever paused to think about what that might mean for your church? What that might mean for you as a Christian? In your church, it's very possible that there are a number of adoptive families and foster parents. We've already found out that that's the case in some of the churches that you're from. There may be some kinship carers who are looking after other children from their wider family. And the children they care for probably will be in your children and youth work, in your work that you do with families, and in your toddler groups.
So, one carer told Home for Good, fostered or adopted children will almost certainly not have experienced anything like a church meeting before. As a result, they were unlikely to behave in the way they're expected of children who have been attending church with their parents for years.
It's also likely that these children and their families are facing many challenges as they grapple with the effects of that trauma and loss that those children have felt. Some traditional styles and models of discipline and parenting simply won't be effective, and at times they may even be detrimental to the child's ongoing progress and their emotional well-being. In the Home for Good book, which I've brought a couple of copies with me, if you're interested in one, we can have the 10 quid today. Commercial over. Christian, Miriam Kanai, Christian you saw there and his wife, they wrote this and they give a great illustration to help us understand what it is that I'm trying to say here.
Okay, so imagine you're walking down the road with your family when a large dog walks past and snarls, scaring your adopted 4-year-old. He jumps away and runs into the road, where he narrowly escapes being hit by a car. A typical instinctive reaction to this would be to shout at your son, "Get out of the road, come here, never jump into oncoming traffic again. You frightened me and you nearly got yourself killed." A typical child would cope with this reaction. It has appealed to their inbuilt sense of shame. You frightened me. And their sense of self-preservation. You nearly got yourself killed. As this situation naturally diffuses and nurtures an equilibrium, the parent might use the incident to teach their child about the Green Cross Code and all is well. However, a traumatized child would not cope well with this reaction at all. Their sense of shame and self-preservation is likely to be missing or immature due to the lack of nurture from birth. All they hear is shouting. So first they have been frightened by the dog, then by the car, then by the parent figure. There is a pattern they are all too familiar with and affirms what they already believe, that the world is a dangerous place, whatever they do. The overwhelming and emotional overload may have reminded them of previous traumas and tricked the child's body into a flight response.
We've already answered a couple of, or a bit of this question, but I'd like to put it to you again, just very quickly. What's your experience? Do you know of children in your church who were fostered or adopted? And has this created challenges for you, even within youth and children's work and work with families, or in your gatherings as a whole? And we've literally got about 3 or 4 minutes for this, so don't hang back. If you've got an experience, please share it.
In my experience with Abby and Lady, who attends my youth group and attends our youth sessions on Sunday afternoon, and there are no issues, but I also know her more, and I know the issues that there are to get her there, and how she reacts when she gets home, and yet while she's with us, is perfectly in line with all the rest of the teenagers, average teenager behaviour. So that one's always confused me a little bit. But then I'm very aware of the concept of your kids will behave better elsewhere than they do at home. So I don't know how much of it is natural teenager behaviour and how much of it is
some of it
kind
also
of
may well
asking.
be, I don't want to be different, and so I'll fit in with what's going on.
Well, I've got a small adopted grandson, and he's doing really well. He's been in our family 12 months, but there are things that frighten him. So he's frightened of emergency vehicles, noise, things like that. We've recently added his sibling to our family, his younger sibling, and they're still doing kind of family contact time, and the lady that turned up to take the younger one to contact time was the same person that had done it for him, and he had a complete and utter meltdown. We didn't actually realise he would even know, to be honest. So we've had a few kind of, it's interesting.
Interesting about the things that you're talking is not being aware of something you think they would have forgotten. I remember years ago a couple who adopted twins, very young age. And the twins would often talk about, would say, oh, do you remember when we were in this room and talk about some horrific things happening? And the parents were like absolutely stunned. But because they knew the history, they weren't surprised. But they were babies when they were removed, and the things that trauma that still came with them. When you think, by this stage they were 5, and they'd come out to that situation by being before they were 1. But they were still talking about things, and it was just beyond what they should know.
I'm very aware the teenager I have that I'm talking about, having known their mum for a very long time, knew her mum when they adopted her at 2 years old. And at 13, still has major issues. And you would think, like I say, that it would all be long forgotten.
They said that adopted children find a relationship with their adopted mum particularly difficult. Your experience?
Both of our children came home when they were 4 weeks old, and there have been challenges, but the relationship is between them and mum their mum is, as in my wife, is very, very good and has been. But then again, I think back and telling them the story of they'd been adopted and all that sort of thing was always part of me. I can remember her, when Elizabeth first came home, Elizabeth laid on the changing nappy, rehearsing the story, because Elizabeth probably didn't understand it at that point, but Jeanette had to get used to telling the story sort of thing. So right from the start, they've had that story told to them on a regular basis. it'd be lovely to hear lots more of your experiences. We'll be really tight for time, so I'm going to move on if that's all right. And say that the church can be a tremendous support for adopted parents and foster carers, but it can also be a place where they and their children feel misunderstood, they feel isolated, and even criticised. Here's another foster carer's story.
Yeah, see, one of our foster children, Mark, struggled to settle in church services due to his traumatic background and ADHD. One dad sat with us and offered to draw for Mark whatever he ordered. Each week, to Mark's delight and giggles, a bicycle, a speedway or racing car would be sketched. It was a small gesture, but it made the service something to look forward to.
Yeah, sadly, it's not always this way when children are in church. Sunday mornings can be the most difficult time of the week for families that foster and adopt. The struggle it takes to get those children ready and to get them out, to get them to the service can be exhausting. But once there, the disapproving looks, the talks, the unhelpful comments can make them wonder if it's really worth it. Home for Good believes that the church is well placed to find a home for every child who needs one, but it's essential, as he says, family and church wrap around and support those who foster and adopt. I'm going to go off script a little bit, and Simon's not ready for this, but I'll throw it at him. Simon, could you think of one thing where you could say, this happened in our church, and as a result of it, we've had to think of a different way of doing things?
Yes, so I think being unshockable. Never quite know what's going to happen in these children's what they might have heard and to be unshockable, give time, make eye contact, get down on their level, just get down and engage with them, and model good behaviour without expecting it straight away. And to do that consistently, and we've been very fortunate with our church family that it's not just my wife and I, we have lots 7, 8, 9, 10 couples in our group. And we can go on a church walk or whatever, and they'll see how we are, but they'll see a similar thing repeated safely. Safe men, safe women, and both are important. I could say lots more.
If you want to hear, Simon's going to do one of the 4-minute stories in the next session in the main hall, so come along and listen to that. Over to you.
So I'm just going to share. So my background, youth work, been involved in youth work since I was 18. Actually did youth work in Sheffield for a number of years before moving on to focus on prisons. So had a lot of contact with a lot of young people that have been involved in the care system, either been on what we call like child in need plans, that have social workers involved, or child protection plans, have been removed from their families, or been in that process with a young person while they've been removed, or are in foster care or adoption, or are in care of a prison system. So just kind of a little bit of my learning and understanding of that journey. Most of that I've worked for a church in those situations as well, so I didn't work for a statutory organisation, I worked for the church. And the reason why we ended up with those young people was partly the types of youth work that we did. It was the areas that we chose to go to. We didn't just stay with the kids that turned up at church. We actively went out into the community and into the estates to work with young people that would be considered more vulnerable within our communities. And I never really, I did a youth work degree, and you'd think I'd know a bit more about youth development, but I didn't. And there was a lot that I could see, and I was like, these kids can't just be behaving this way for no reason. So I could see what was happening, but I didn't always have an understanding of what was going on, or why they responded or reacted the way they did, and kind of had to learn very quickly how to manage that behaviour or the understanding and what those kind of things look like. And just learned ways that just hadn't quite at the time as well. There wasn't being a church youth worker, there wasn't much in terms of accessing training or things that were out there that we could go to, because wasn't a statutory organisation, and they still were a bit unsure of churches and our ability to manage the types of young people that we were working with. But now there is a lot more information around trauma and attachment and understanding those different things, and that you can go on and enable me to verbalise something that I might have done intuitively, which I'm like, oh, now I know what the theory is or underpinning that, which has been really helpful. And I made a lot of mistakes in my early days of youth work. So just a really basic understanding of some of the roots of behaviour for me was as understanding ACEs. So don't know, but you've come across ACEs, so it's adverse childhood effects. And it's a very basic but it's still helpful, especially if you've not done much around trauma and attachment, or kind of looking at kind of some of the things that might affect children. And again, it's not about labelling these young people, it's having a knowledge and an understanding, and I think having knowledge and understanding enables you to help support a young person better. And sometimes you might not know the story of a young person you work with, but there might be signs when you start to work with them that you're like, oh, it's an interesting way that you're handling that situation also, and kind of getting to understand them. And it might be that you might have had children that are fostered or adopted that come to your things, and what we are aware of, that those young people will have suffered significant trauma, and that's why they're not with their families. So even if the parent has chosen to put some parents do choose to put a child up for adoption or choose to put them into care, there's still a significant attachment that has been broken, and significant trauma. So even at kind of 4 days old going into care, there's still a significant effect there. So ACEs are, or the ACEs that they've established are physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, mental illness, divorce, substance abuse, violence against a partner, violence within the home, mental illness, and having a relative that's being sent to jail or prison. And there are many other traumas that can affect people, but they're just what they would call the ACEs. And so I guess I'll just share some stories really from how I've kind of seen the young people that I've worked with, but also had to manage those kind of understanding of that. So young person A, so A was adopted from birth, but ended up in prison at the age of 15 for murder. So A was removed from birth family at birth, and A was put into adoption and was adopted by a white family. He was black and of African heritage. He was brought up in a loving adopted family and who provided for his basic needs. However, he really struggled with his identity and where he fitted in the world, and grew up in a very white area. He had lots of questions. He found himself in a situation that meant he was arrested for murder at 14 along with another 18-year-old boy. I tell you this story because although he was adopted at birth, whilst in utero, so whilst he was still within the womb, he was subject to all the ACEs, so that all happened to him, even though he was within the womb. There's still significant trauma that happened, albeit he was not physically born yet, and that was why he was removed. And you may look at a family and it'd be amazing, but we also, the way that our brains develop and the trauma experience can affect our development hugely. And I'm not saying that happens to all kids that are adopted, but it is an understanding that it was just a story of understanding how it can be from birth to onwards. Next is a church context. So as a church youth worker, was a young person who attended church with his family, both they and their sister. And I say they because they have been struggling with their identity, so and what they identify as. So I use they and them as pronouns to help with that. So Em was a young person who attended church with his family. Both they and their sister came with complex needs. Em knew they were adopted as they were older when this happened, whereas their sister was unaware. As a church with little resources, so we were a very small Anglican church with little resources, somehow we became a church that parents and carers and their children felt comfortable coming with complex needs, meaning over half of our youth and children had complex needs. The parent of Em struggled with Em's behaviour at home, and this has resulted in several social services interventions. We as a church struggled how to know how to pastorally support the family and also how to safeguard, and we had to report at times the level of behaviour that was recurring within the family home. But then we also worked with the family and social care to decide how we could best support them. And social care released some funds to pay for a weekly one-to-one programme to one-to-one support for Em. The parents wanted this to be our youth worker, which seemed to be a great way that we could support the parents and the young person. And then my own experience. So I myself went through the fostering process as a single carer in rented accommodation, and at the time was working 2 part-time jobs, but once fostering had finished, I dropped one of the jobs and just worked part-time. Due to my experience in working with young people, they felt I would be able to manage a slightly more challenging teenager. Once I'd been approved, it took a few weeks until the placement was finalised. I worked with a great group of churches and had some great youth workers. I would not have been able to survive without them. It was quite intense for both myself and the young person I was fostering. So having people that she liked, that could take her out for coffee, was amazing. She also got involved in our youth work, which at times had its challenges. However, before she came to me, she'd never been to church or experienced it. It was decided by the social workers and myself that the young person needed more than I could give her, and this was heartbreaking, but you need to know your limits. However, she is still connected with youth workers, they still work with a social worker, they see her once a month on a one-to-one basis, and she comes to youth church and wants to get baptised. I knew youth work was important, but I did not know how non-negotiable youth work was until then. So as youth, children's and family workers, you have just an important part to play as the foster carers and adopted parents. Building positive relationship attachments is so vital, and often you are the only relationship that they don't have to have, and in that choosing of that relationship, it's so important. The challenge for children's and youth workers is managing behaviour and keeping everyone safe. We've had to ask young people not to attend certain sessions as we need to protect other young people. However, we've always given them other options as to what we can do with them. And when working with children and young people, the challenging behaviour is always difficult, but working with parents and carers in social care and the young person will help. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a summary background.
We're going to miss out on break, all right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's no secret that Home Group believes that the local church is ideally placed to wrap around families who foster and adopt and how to support them. We talk about it a lot in what we do. An understanding of how the church can support and can make such a huge difference is really, really important. Sometimes it can be what enables a family to step into fostering and adoption if they know that their church is going to be around. I want to tell you a story of foster carers Stu and Louis, and they told us this story. There are many ways that our church has shown that they're with us and for us as we've started fostering. We received so much encouragement in prayer as we started the process. And one church member looked after our birth children every week so that we could attend the 8 weeks of preparation workshops. We asked a few individuals and families to join our official support network, and they've all been DBS checked so they can offer practical help in placements, as well as emotional support for us. We were delighted that others heard about this support group and asked to join. We've had meals provided, the loan of clothes and toys as children have come into our home. We've been so touched by the way so many in our church have been sensitive to our changing lifestyle, and we feel very strengthened by the shared heart and vision of of others. It really does make a big difference to know people are standing with us who understand what we are doing and why. So there's a prime example there of just the church just getting around people and doing some of the very practical things they can do can make a world of difference.
And just another story as well is having somewhere to turn when things are challenging can be amazing, but having people who respond when things are exceptionally challenging can make impossible things possible. Dr. Mum Marie has this to say. Our little boy came home when he was 21 months old. Although we'll never know the full extent of all he had experienced in his early life, one thing we knew for sure was that food had caused him extreme anxiety. It's likely he hadn't always been given food regularly, so when meal times approached or he saw food being prepared, he got deeply distressed. Our elder adopted daughter had just turned 5 and was really struggling with such a huge change in her life already, so it was understandable that these times of anxiety made her even more upset too. Those early days were already so hard, but meal times became possible. I called our church leader in desperation asking for help, and they responded in the most amazing way. Not only did they provide meals for us for 10 days straight, they ensured that food arrived at our door, hot and ready to eat at meal times. Removing the element of food preparation completely broke the cycle of stress for our little boy, and his anxiety levels dropped right down. Being able to establish consistent routines and began to gain his trust, while keeping things calm to help our daughter through such a huge transition. What our church did was simple and practical, but there are no words to explain the significance of it and the difference it made for our family.
One more story and then I'm going to get you guys to do a little bit of talking to each other, if that's all right. And I love this example from the foster carer called Francis because it shows how going that extra mile can make a massive difference. We were on holiday this summer with our little foster child. We really wanted to get to church on the Sunday, but hadn't had time to research one beforehand and didn't have a good enough signal to look on our phones. So we just went into the nearest church hoping for the best, not a little nervous about how she would cope in the new setting and what kind of response we might get. Would she be too loud? Would she be unsettled? Would she even stay? When we arrived, the vicar came over and introduced himself. I felt able to share our concerns with him, only to be told, oh, don't worry about anything. We have several adoptive and foster families here. We understand your concerns. He went on to show us around so that she knew where things were, and he left us with these words, "You're very welcome here." It was amazing to find such a safe and welcoming place where we could worship together. We've got loads of the stories we were going to tell you, but we're running behind time. So if you want to know more of the stories, there's some great blogs and stories on our website with the resources page. And if you bob and see me afterwards, I can give you, point you to a couple of documents that will give you lots of those really encouraging stories about what churches can do. I want to ask you, I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and what I'm going to ask you to do is to split into groups of 2, if that's all right, so pair up. There we go. So, simple questions. What in your church could be a challenge for fostering or adopted children and those who care for them? What could you do differently to change it, and what would you need to do to make that change happen? So, just literally, we've got about 10 minutes for this, so if you just turn into 2s, chat about it, and see if you can come up with answers to those questions. And if we've got time, if you seem to sort of come to a break, then we might have a bit of time for you to get some of those things back. All right, so go for it. I think we've probably got about 3 minutes. So before we have to move on to the last little bit. So is there anything from your discussion that particularly stuck in your mind that you think that would be great to share with the rest of the room?
I've got a question.
Go for it.
So, in relation, especially I've come to this session, when it says what in your church could be a challenge for foster adopted children, I look at my church and we were kind of discussing something you've had to do differently in yours, and then it's made me think about the layout and the behaviours in mine. But what would you class as challenges to people. I mean, I know, I look at my building and how, we, as an Anglican church, we're not stand up, sit down. We are loud, modern music. There's kids all over. There's more special needs than I think Doncaster Royal Family could handle, between adults and children. There's all sorts going on, so it makes it very noisy, very loud, very rustly. I mean, is that in itself an issue to sort of find out?
Could be. But I mean, that's where you know, when you look at which church you're going to go to, those are things you take into account, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, so I think the challenges we're talking about are more like a very simple story that we heard a young family come into a church with a foster child who, for the first 4 years of their life, was malnourished. Didn't know where the next meal was coming from a lot of the time. Sits down and in front, on the road in front of the family, and mum did what all great mums do, and great dads, of course, not being sexist here, and as a more quiet time in the service started, produced a little Tupperware with carrot sticks and all this sort of thing in it, and child on the road behind, at that point, click, that is mine, I'm having that, you know, because there's food and I'm going to get that sort of thing, you know, and caused a bit of a ruckus in the service and had to be taken out, but had the church leader had a conversation with that parent afterwards to find out what the issue was, not can you make sure that doesn't happen again, but okay, what's the issue, what are we doing wrong here, you know. And so made absolutely sure that a family in front, if they did that next week, brought one for that child as well, you know, but also things like they moved their coffee table out in the foyer away from the door further into the foyer so that child didn't have to go past the plate of biscuits on the way out and things like that. So it's just saying, okay, here's a challenge that comes from the baggage that this child brings with them, and how can we adapt what we do so that we can still do what we do, but it doesn't cause the issue. And there's lots of stories, again, if you go on our website and the resources, there's lots of stories and blogs and articles about that sort of thing, and understanding it. There's a really good series. Unfortunately, I find our resources there in our website a little bit confusing on the blogs, but there is a series called What the Church Needs to Know About, and then there's bits added to that sentence each time. So if you go through it and look for those, there's lots of different ones of those that actually give you some really, really great ideas about stuff and what you need to understand first. Because a lot of this is about understanding. The other thing to say is, and I'm sure Simon will back me up on this, the people who know best how to handle it and what you can do to help those children and other foster carers themselves. Have a chat with them, talk to them.
So very well we had an issue in our toddler group with someone who was looking after their sister's children for a little while, and one of them was an obsessive eater. And I just thought it was one of those kids, because we have several kids that constantly graze. And I thought that's just what he was doing until she had a word and said, so what we did was then we moved our snack time to another room. But I've never made the connection till now that actually there's a trauma involved. I just thought he's one of our grazers for constant lunches. But
most of the behaviours that cause problems for this are based on what's happened in the past, and that even, you know, we talked about, didn't we, about how young they can be, and they still remember this. You know, even pre-birth, you know, in utero, if they've been abused or their mum has been abused, and that all is taken on by the child. You know, and we have to remember that and recognise those things. But it is about, let's have a conversation. Let's make it a conversation about not about how can we change the behaviour of your child, but how can we adapt so that the behaviour of your child doesn't happen? Because we've not triggered it. There will still be occasions when that child kicks off. But at the end of the day, let's take away the triggers if we can to stop it happening, so they can be part of what we do, and we can be part of what we do as well.
I suppose there's a question, as the child grows up, does it lose those triggers, or is it going to go?
I've got a 27-year-old son, but there are triggers that still set him off. And he came to us at 4 weeks old. You know, so and there's still things that happen. Not very often now, but there are still things that happen because he's learned how to control those
And
things.
so
They're
we've
still
seen
there.
that change slowly.
Yeah.
He's slowly learning
Yeah.
to deal with some of these things.
Stephen will tell you if you have a good conversation with him that those triggers still happen, but he's learned how to control those triggers, so he's not
His
going
reaction
through any
to
less
it.
trauma.
Yeah.
That trauma is still there, that hurt is still there, and what actually happens then is he bottles it all up inside, and then he walks through the door at home, and it's just like, blah, you know, it's just like, and so we get it in the head. But actually we're so pleased because he works, I'll move on in a second because we're running out of time, but he works in a little bistro down the road in an old people's sheltered accommodation block.
So it's
And the old folks love him. Whenever I go in there, because it's open to the public as well, whenever I go in there, they say, oh, he's a lovely boy, he's so caring, he's so lovely. I'm thinking, I'm so glad that all what he bottles up comes out at home and doesn't come out here, you know. So he obviously has learned to control it, you know, but it all comes out when he gets home.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, isn't it? We've all got things that, you know, everyone carries some level of trauma. It doesn't have to be abuse, it can be, you know, a car crash, for example, and anyone could be in a car crash. And, you know, it's just one of those things, isn't it? So I think it's just being aware of, you know, we all, our bodies retain stuff, and that's just an unfortunate. There's lots of medical reasons why we're not, you know, it's time to do that, but I guess that's it. If you can try and get as much of an understanding as possible, then it's really helpful for the families that you're working with and for the kids that you work with as well. You know, I've learned the hard way, I'm not going to lie. I wish I'd learned a lot more a lot earlier.
I've learned the hard way as well. I'm going to bring it to land if that's all right. And we've got some resource that we'd really love to share with you if you're interested in pursuing this. As I said, there's loads and loads of stuff on our website in the way of films, blogs, articles, reports, etc. And a couple of webinars coming up if you're interested, which is very much on the topic that we've been looking at about how the church becomes a community of welcome. They're online, you can find them on our events page on our website and book in for them. They're going to last for about 90 minutes and they'll be presented by folks from Home for Good who've got experience in this field, and there'll be a mixture of theory and stories and good ideas as to how you can do things differently to adapt and to help be that community of welcome. Do you want to do that?
Yeah. So the other one is we've got we do quite a lot of kind of Bible study resources. So a new one is Make Room. Again, it's still around the kind of the welcoming community. How do you make space? What does God say about different issues around justice? So it's really helpful to kind of get other aspects of your church having those conversations, and it not just be on the youth and kids workers or all the volunteers, but actually saying, come on, how can we have these conversations and getting kind of in and so on.
Yeah, you've got a flyer about that one in your bag that you can take away, but it's all online, so it's downloadable Bible teaching, 5-6 minute films, Bible teaching, some stories of people like Simon and Sarah just sharing their stories that you can use as well, and then there's some worksheets you can print off for participants and notions just to take notes. There's a leader's guide, download the leader's guide, etc. So it's all free, it's online. All you need to do is just fill in your details and the church details, and then you'll automatically be given access to it on the website. So there's loads of other stuff that we can do. Let me stick up QR code and then we'll get away. Please do connect with us. Do you want to do the connect bit or do you want me to do it? I'll do it.
I said yes, I'll do it, and then I thought I was like, I actually don't know what the answer. I've only been working for the guys for 3 weeks. Don't know what I do.
Please do connect with us, and we'd love to connect with you. If you go on to the Connect page of our website, or scan the QR code, whatever, you'll find those 3 buttons that you can see at the bottom on the right there, on that page when you get on there. If you click on sign up to our emails, we send out a weekly digest that just tells you a little bit about stuff that's been going on. You see typical, here's a little box with a few sentences in. If you want to know more about that, click on it, it takes you through to the main article. Once a month, on the first Friday of the month, with that comes things you could be praying about during this month. So there's the March one has just come out. So if you can pray for and stuff that you can take to your church to pray for. And if you're interested in inquiring about Fostering Word, there's a second button on there. And we're always interested in people who can give us a bit of money as well. So that's what but we'll not go there because that's not the idea of this seminar. But that's us. Thank you so much for being with us. I think we've got 2 minutes to spare. We didn't do too badly there, did we? That's great. That's very much. Thank you very much. And please do connect with Pippa, because Pippa is the person for this neck of the woods, and she'd love to connect with you.